I am delighted to have Martin Wolf back on Economics Matters, the podcast. Martin is uh, chief, I'm not sure exactly what your formal title is, but chief guru at the Financial Times economics savant at the Financial Times. He's been there for many years. And he's been informing us about economic matters and geopolitical matters for decades at the FT. I read him all the time and watch his podcasts, and he's just a terrific, informed person. And we're going to talk about the current uh, geopolitical situation, but also about the economic policy in the U.S. under the new administration. And what I've decided to do is rather than read through a bio of Martin, I've asked Martin just to quickly summarize his kind of career and current position, title, but also his important new book, recent book uh, on these matters that help us understand why the uh, world economy and why the world seems to be going crazy in a direction that we saw in the 1930s.
So
Mark,
first of all, Larry, I'm delighted to be with you. I've been a long time reader. I've always been stimulated by your thinking, even where occasionally I disagree. That's what part of the fun.
Mark,
Um, so uh, I started my career further back than I'm prepared to admit at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. in the 70s. So I've now admitted it. I spent quite a number of years working on international trade at a think tank here in London. And in 1987, I joined the Financial Times. And since 1996, so that I'm now in my 30th year, I've been the FT's chief economics commentator, which essentially means the principal economics columnist. I have written, I think, two books that are relevant to our discussion. The most recent is entitled The Crisis of Democratic Capitalism. And I started writing that or thinking about it in 2016, and you might be able to guess why. And before that, I wrote a book called The Shifts and the Shocks, which was an analysis of what, in my perspective, caused the global financial crisis and its possible consequences, of which I mentioned, in addition, political ones. So I've been thinking about this now back since about 2007, 8.
right. So the book about the uh, the crisis in democratic capitalism is really focused on uh, inequality leading to uh, lack of cohesion in society, and then you have the potential for a demagogue to attract attention and say, "I'm going to save you. I'm going to, rid you of all your frustrations," and also blame groups that have nothing to do with your particular situation, but blame particular minorities and immigrants and uh, you know, racial groups, ethnic groups, religious groups. So it's exactly what Hitler and his gang did in the 30s. They took advantage of the Great Depression to say we have the answers, and by the way, these people caused the problem, and we're going to get rid of them. Now, do you think we're so? That's an inadequate summary of an important book that everybody should pick up and read, especially in these days. Do you think we're even close to that situation here in the U.S.? Uh, we have some amazing things happening in the U.S. that nobody would ever have expected. You've got, uh, uh, in some ways, Trump has released from prison a large number of people who've engaged in, or a goodly number of people that have engaged in violence and are able to organize uh, threats against political enemies of Trump, just like Hitler had his own whatever stormtroopers available in the early years to intimidate people and to help take full control. And then we have attacks on the press. We have lawsuits being levied against the press. This is the way Trump is proceeding. He's not, firebombing CBS headquarters, but he's suing CBS, which and putting a chill on the press, and apparently winning in this context. So, and then we have his operatives who are not political, who are not elected officials, going through Treasury's electronic payment systems and are able to recover private information about private individuals, how much you're getting in a tax return, how much was your pre-tax income, how much Social Security benefits are you getting, and who knows what they could be doing. A lot of the folks here are in their early 20s, have very dubious social media records of they're racist and just crazy. And to think that these people have access to one's Social Security records potentially or income tax returns boggles the mind. Martin, are we seeing is this 1933 all over again?
Well, so this is a very deep question, and you've raised lots of points. So let me try and deal with them as best I can in a relative brief time. I think it's probably unnecessary to say this is 1933 because people will immediately say, well, Trump isn't Hitler. And I actually agree. Trump has some very big differences from Hitler. I would say this is very, very clearly an autocratic takeover. And there have been lots of autocratic takeovers across the world. We in the West happen to fixate upon the 30s because it had such immensely serious consequences. But of course, there was prior to Hitler, there was Mussolini. But if you look at what's been going on in a whole number of countries around the world, most of them emerging in developing countries like Turkey. It's happening now in India. It happened in Hungary. These are autocratic takeovers. And of course, a more extreme example going very much to the extreme end is what's happened in Putin's Russia. So what is the essence of an autocratic takeover that we can very, very clearly see? The first is that, and then this is in no particular order, but I think it's central. First, that somebody takes over or wins power. Often they do win power in elections, as Hitler did, as actually all the other people I've mentioned did, and they turn the bureaucracy into an instrument of their own power. That is to say, they ensure that the principal figures in the government and the civil servants are personally loyal to the leader. They understand very clearly that they have a responsibility to serve the interests of the leader. As I understand it, one of the things that's going on at the moment in this regard is the people who are being vetted for being appointed in the new Department of Justice under the new Attorney General are being asked whether they agree that Donald Trump won the presidential election of 2020 and that the January 6th episode was a heroic attempt to reverse this injustice of his being deprived of office. We know about as well as anything can be known on earth that these are lies. But the people who say this are basically either fanatics or opportunists. So we know who they will be and we know how they're going to behave in implementing that clause. Very similar things are clearly going to happen in the intelligence services, I would guess, in the tax service. I would guess the people who are going to be promoted in the armed forces will be similar under the new dispensation. In addition to this, we're seeing indeed the taking over by outsiders who are not even part of the state, amazingly, of the records of the Treasury and no doubt other institutions. So the whole governmental system, and this was always made clear in the Heritage Foundation's documents about Project 2025, that this would become an instrument of power. Once you've got this instrument of power, then you can use it to do all sorts of things. You can attack the press and terrorize the press and the owners of the press into supporting whatever lies the administration wishes to tell. You can use it to attack state and municipal officials. You can use it to do that. You can use this to do it directly through military or other intervention, which I expect, but you can also do it indirectly by attacking their wealth, their resources, and so forth. And you can also, and I think this will be a very important step, which will matter to you and to me, I firmly expect from what we've heard from them that they will try to suborn the statistical services to make sure that the data that comes out on GDP, finance, and all the government's finances and all the rest of it are to Mr. Trump's liking. And Mr. Trump has made very clear frequently how much he objects to data that is not to his liking. For instance, on inflation, for instance, on output, for instance, on trade, whatever it may be. So, and on health, I think we can confidently expect under the new Secretary for Health that the data on health will no longer be reliable. Because if there are, for example, major outbreaks of illness following the withdrawal of vaccination or the discouragement of vaccination, we're not going to be told that either. All these are normal characteristics of autocracies. And then the question arises, which is clearly the most important, at what point can we say that it will no longer be possible to expect a fair election? And I would note that a significant part of your country and parts of the country that have supported Mr. Trump enthusiastically have effectively run in one way or another one-party states ever since the Civil War. They've just shifted from one party to the other when it became clear which was the friendlier to them. And the techniques of voter suppression are well known and used. And I would expect them to become much more universal. And the sort of bravery that we saw during the presidential election before last, when officials said, no, we're not going to change the votes, these are accurate votes, may not occur next time. In which, if that's happened, then the republic is fundamentally and deeply undermined. And so this, very briefly, I know it was much too long, but very briefly, the sorts of things I expect to see, and I started writing about that. My first column on exactly these sorts of subject was published in March 2016 when Trump first emerged. And I think he's now slowly, after learning a lot on the way, getting there.
Let's talk about retirement for a minute. It's something Americans think about regularly. Ask yourself, how financially secure do you really feel? Do you have enough money to retire? How much is really enough? And if you don't have enough money, how can you possibly find that extra money before you do retire? These are all tough questions. My retirement software, Maxify Planner, is the powerful online planning tool that takes the guesswork out of retirement. It weighs your assets against your fixed expenses to calculate how much you can safely spend every year for the rest of your life based on when you decide to retire. And it shows you safe ways to find more money. Maxify makes a complicated problem like retirement planning simple. It's accurate, easy to use, and produces what you really seek, peace of mind. So make the smart choice and visit Maxify.com today. Don't miss this opportunity. That's Maxify with an I, Maxify, Maxify.com. Now let's get back to the podcast. So one of the things that is happening in real time is that they're going after universities. Musk is saying that, well, there's these grants through the National Institute of Health, the National Institute of the National Science Foundation. There's an overhead. Everybody knows that the government has been supporting higher education for years with a high overhead rate on direct costs. And so Musk is claiming, well, this is outrageous, but this is just a way really of, there shouldn't be a 67% overhead. It should be 15%, and we're going to cut it overnight from 67 to 15. We're not going to have any more grants being reviewed. This will, and by the way, rich universities like Harvard or Yale have enough endowment, they can just pay their own costs for their scientists that and other academics and who have these grants. But the reality is that all that endowment money is contractually and legally specified for certain purposes in these institutions. It's not free general funds. So what this is a decision to really go after academics, which is what the first thing Hitler did when he moved into Poland was organized the murder or incarceration in concentration camps of all the intelligentsia in Poland. So it's I guess the first question comes to mind here is, to what extent do you think Trump is running this show and calling these shots, and that his entourage has kind of gone off the wagon and he's going to pull them back? I mean, I'm not trying to suggest that Trump is Hitler either. He hasn't explicitly called for anybody's, extermination. Okay, he is not above putting children in cages, right? He's not above sending or encouraging a mob to go invade Congress, and they're chanting, "Let's lynch the vice president, Michael, Pence," and that to me is a resort to violence at a small scale. So there's some similarities there, but yeah, he's not. But I'm not sure Hitler in 33 was Hitler in 38 either. As he acquired more power, he just started to do more and more things. So what's your take on Trump? He's clearly, putting out trial balloons and then stepping back and seeing reactions. And then, for example, these tariffs, 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada, floated those, said he was going to do it, and then pulled back. Are there any, do you think he understands exactly what he's doing, that he has a grand scheme here, or do you think he's just making it up as it goes along, or he's under the control of other people at this point, that his mental facilities are lacking or waning? I just heard a podcast of David K. Johnson, who's been writing about Trump for years as well, and he thinks he's just mentally out of it, and that he's just being directed by his followers at this point. Any idea? What's your response to that?
Well, first of all, obviously, I'm here sitting in London. I'm quite a long way away from this, and I don't follow what Trump is doing as closely as I'm sure many Americans are doing. So this is only my perception from somebody who's viewed him from outside. But what I see doesn't seem to be new. It seems to me with one crucial exception, which is linked to what you said, the Trump of 2016 when he really emerged, but in a somewhat different context. But let me just make one little comment on your points. While you're absolutely right, that when Hitler came into power in 33, he didn't start by shooting people or putting them in gas chambers yet. That's absolutely true. But he started sacking people from universities very soon, particularly Jews, of course. That was a big chunk of the intelligentsia. And anybody who was a critic got into terrible trouble, and he started opening concentration camps very quickly. But I think the more important difference between Trump and Hitler is that Hitler made no secret that he was a militarist from the beginning. He was about rearming and revenging Germany for the defeat and the subsequent treatment of Germany in the after the First World War. Now, I think Trump is also about retribution. Indeed, he's made it very clear that he was, but while he's clearly prepared to attack other countries, particularly with the trade instrument, as you've mentioned, the one thing so far as I see, I can't see in Trump yet, anyway, is a desire to conquer the world. It seems to indicate some desire to take over Greenland and Panama and maybe Canada, but he hasn't said he wants to conquer Russia or China, which is a good news. I think that really would be pretty scary, particularly in a nuclear age. But let me come back to the point you made, a couple of points which I will focus on. One, the universities and the intelligentsia, and secondly, what sort of Trump are we seeing now, and how does he fit in with this broad picture I've given of an autocratic takeover? It's very, very clear that Trump and the people around him agree that the American intelligentsia are a big part of the enemy, and they identify that with the great universities and particularly actually the woke academics, and they all agree on that, and they want to attack that. Now, I've been a little bit surprised at the attacks on science, not because Trump has ever shown much understanding of or affection for science. He clearly hasn't, particularly in the health area, which is presumably why he has just employed RFK Jr. as his health secretary. But after all, people like Musk and Trump himself know very well that American power is closely related to its technological edge. And everybody knows anything about this, and surely Musk knows that America's technological edge has been very closely associated since at least the beginning of the Second World War, one might say well before, with the contribution of American universities to the development of American science and technology. I mean, very, very much so. Just think about everything that has been developed in America. So it would seem pretty obvious to me that if you attack that seriously, then you are undermining an absolute bedrock of American power. But they don't seem to be too worried about it yet. And that seems to me a real confusion. I would expect them to go after some aspects of universities, but not the core research institutions. We will see how that develops. But at some point, somebody's going to say, well, all the scientists are going to give up, and that's not what we are interested in. You can't be America first and say, well, and by the way, let's trash the American scientific establishment. That just seems to me completely crazy, even by their standards.
Well, the one thing just on that, the one thing they're trying to get through is this maintenance of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017, which is supposed to come to an end in 2026 next year. And so they need to have that passed, and that's very expensive in terms of a 10-year budget forecast. So they need to get House Republicans who are fiscally conservative to think that there's other savings that are going to be offsetting the cost of retaining the TCJA. So I see them pushing and cutting everything in order to say to these Congress folks, now you can approve the continuation of the TCJA. It's possible that after that was passed, they would reverse themselves on, just like Trump has reversed himself on Canada and Mexico. This reversal behavior, putting out these feelers, but not actually, landing, sending the Navy to Greenland to block its ports, whatever, and take over. Is that a sign of that there are real limits to what he can do, or you think he's just biding his time and seeing what he can get away with, and that ultimately that he's going to go for what he wants to the full extent he can? And I mean, clearly, if the U.S. were to invade Canada or Greenland, there would be a global reaction. And I guess my question is whether the European Union and the UK represent a potential check on his behavior.
Well, these are very, again, very, very difficult and complicated questions. There's so many things I think we don't know about what might be called Trump 2.0. I think he genuinely wants to create an autocratic system in the US. That fits in within his instincts and his belief about how power should be exercised. But the question might be rather, that's how he wants government to be. Basically, the basic characteristic of an arbitrary despotism is that what the ruler says is law for the government. It is what people have to do, and it's frightening if you disobey it. But of course, that's quite separate from what he wants to do with power. I think of it as distinguishing between how he wants to exercise power and then what he wants to do with it. And on the latter, it's quite difficult to work out precisely what his objectives are. So if you think about the issue you raise, tax cuts and the spending cuts, which of it is performance and what of it is absolutely real bottom line, this must happen, is difficult to work out. And I sometimes do wonder whether he now or ever has been really clear about this, because he's always gone in for this performance. But to take, for example, one thing that I follow pretty closely, trade policy, I think it's pretty clear there are some aspects of trade policy he's going to follow through with. He's going to attack China. He's going to get in a trade war with China. It's almost certain that that will lead to retaliation and we'll end up with pretty high tariffs on both sides. I think it's pretty clear that, to me, that is central. How he will treat other countries is to my mind less clear, and we'll have to see how that goes. Then the other issue that you raised, which is you talked about, which I think is very, very interesting, is the future of the state. In other words, how big it will be, what it will spend money on. It's clear to me, I agree with you completely, that he wants to renew the tax cuts and he doesn't want to have a problem with it. I think he's quite indifferent about deficits. He's not shown any real concern for traditional balanced budget conservatism. That's very far from his views. He would like to borrow as much as he can get away with, and he would like to control the Fed. He's indicated that pretty clearly, I think, in order to support this. But he probably doesn't want to have very high inflation. So there will be people in his administration who will tell him, well, you can't really do that, but without risking very serious inflation. It will be very interesting to see how his relationship with the Treasury Secretary, who is likely to say things like that, will go. And then, of course, he may not understand that huge cuts in public spending in the US cannot happen without cutting the mandatory programs, the health, Medicare, Social Security, and things like that. That's my understanding. You can't balance this budget without cutting those. You've written about this many years. And is he really up for that? I think we genuinely don't know. So if I were asked, do I know where monetary and fiscal policy will go under Trump, or how far the trade war will go? I think I would be quite honest. I don't know. And I think he doesn't know on that. Similarly, and this is a crucial one, is he really going to try and remove 11 or 12 million undocumented aliens? I mean, that's a staggering operation to undertake. Could only be done with the military. There would have to be huge camps. I mean, this is a vast operation. You see, are they really prepared to go through that? Again, I think it's unclear to me. So I'm much clearer about how he wishes to exercise power and what simpler things he can do, like intimidating journalists, intimidating critical publications, changing statistics, all that sort of thing seems to me relatively straightforward. But how revolutionary they will really want to be in their politics at home in the sort of areas we've discussed, which will affect tens and hundreds of millions of people. They will see this going on. I think we have to say at this moment, we don't know. He's probably more serious than he was last time. And may I find, finally, the way Trump talks and the way he analyzing things doesn't seem to me have changed. I mean, he thinks in very peculiar ways for somebody who is sort of educated in a standard way about how you reason, how you relate evidence to facts, and so forth, arguments to facts, for instance. He doesn't do that. The difference, I think, which is important, is that he has now an entourage of people who support his aims, who want to establish this sort of state, and who are themselves pretty determined and organized to change things. And one of them, pretty clearly, is Elon Musk. And Elon Musk is a very effective wrecker. That's become now very, very clear. And so I think his impulses can be transmuted into effective action far more easily now than they could be in between 2016 and 2020, because he's got a completely different entourage.
Yeah, I mean, just certainly, if you somehow could figure out how to uh, expel 11 million illegal or claim to be illegal immigrants, separating many people from their children in the process, millions presumably from their children, GDP would fall to the point where we'd have a recession. We'd also have an inflation
Of
that's
course.
higher than we have. So, if there's a check, there's potentially a check based on his constituents losing, well, maybe they would, be paid more for the jobs that were not being filled by the people that were taken away, shipped away. But they would be impacted certainly by inflation. Certainly, these tariffs that we're talking about will come back and be a tax, implicit tax on purchase of everything, not everything, but many things that most perhaps things that we purchase. I can think about my favorite leaf blower for $79 that came right from China within 2 days from Amazon. That would take probably quite, if it were produced in the US, it would probably be $500. And it's fantastic. And, you know, to think that we could compete. So then the question arises, how does, let's say China react? How does it respond like Japan? Japan when they attacked Pearl Harbor, they claimed that we had produced, in effect, declared economic war by embargoing oil shipments to Japan. China could say the U.S. is engaging in economic warfare against us. Here's some options that China has. It could say, you either trade with us, Chile, or we don't trade with you. You either trade with us or trade with the U.S., but not both. Same thing with the European Union. Same thing with the UK. Same thing really with the rest of the world. A lot of these countries will, Chile has about 4 times more trade with China than it does with the US. So they could, say, well, we're gonna have to go with China. Um, that could be a check on his behavior. China could say, look, unless you pull back on this, we're going to declare that you've declared economic war on us, and we're going to take over Taiwan. And good luck stopping us. Uh, and that'll happen in 3 weeks. And if here's the deadline, it's your choice, and we're going to make it official tomorrow, unless you back off. I don't know whether Trump's got, the guts for this. The European Union could say, if you start threatening any more threats uh, against Greenland, we're going to send an army to Greenland, and you'll be fighting us uh, uh, in that effort. Just so you know, and NATO will be coming to a conclusion, and now you're going to be now you can go side with Russia if you'd like, and we're going to go trade with China. Do you see these large, uh, you know, repositionings of global alliances potentially happening here?
Well, first of all, as with the discussion on the future of America, but even more so, we are really talking about, here we really are talking about, I think, relatively extreme uncertainty. I mean, I think the ambitions of the administration within the state of America itself and for the changes it wishes to make are relatively clear. At least some of them are relatively clear. Some of them are more uncertain. Like, are they really going to try and get rid of 11 million people, and how are they going to do it? But when you talk about the geopolitical ramifications, we really are in the greater reaches of uncertainty. Will be my response to your hypotheses, from my perception of what is plausible. So I think China will go tit for tat. If it's a trade war by the United States, it will, and indeed already has, it will retaliate. And if the US tries to force other countries to impose tariffs on China, which interestingly Trump didn't try last time or this time, he has, interestingly, absolutely no desire apparently to use what most of us have always thought was America's greatest weapon in the confrontation with China, which is its alliances. The United States, I've written many columns about the conflict between the United States and China, and I've frequently made the point that while the balance of power between the US and China is reasonably close now, if you add in all the countries of significance that are allied to the United States, the US preponderance in trade and everything else starts looking very, very different, because basically all the other significant financial powers, monetary powers, all the other issuers of reserve currencies are its allies. All the major trading powers other than are its allies, or quasi-allies, quite close. So this America first, which means attacking everybody, including your allies, seems to me an extraordinary policy for the US to adopt. And every American leader I can think of, left, right, since the Second World War, has regarded alliances as valuable assets. So forget that now. They are apparently not willing to use that. But China will retaliate. I think China will not retaliate by non-economic means. It's not going to go to war over Taiwan unless it becomes clear that America is going to attempt a blockade, a true blockade. But to have a true blockade, America would have to coerce or encourage lots of other countries to go along with it, or try a naval blockade of China, which, as I understand it, would be infeasible. I mean, it's too big. It controls too much of the world shipping. You would end up in a naval war, which you're by no means certain of winning. So it seems to me China's tit for tat policy would probably be enough to damage the US enough for China to be able to live with, because China can then trade with other countries. Again, don't forget that for reasons I don't understand, this man and his coterie don't seem to want to get their potential allies to support them in these wars. It's all bilateral. This is very, very weird. I mean, this is pretty stupid stuff, but thank God. Now, the Europeans, I think, will take the view that they don't have the means to fight the US and no desire to fight the US. Absolutely none. They're not very belligerent countries. They've been there, done that. They don't like the ideas of war. And so I think there will be retaliation against American action against Europe. There's no doubt there will be, unlikely with the UK, will do so too weak. But I don't think they're going to retaliate if the US decides to invade Greenland. I don't think there's going to be fighting over that. Of course, it will be wildly illegal, and the US would have to live with the reality that it would sort of behaving like Russia, but maybe they wouldn't mind. There aren't many people, so they'd probably get away with it. What would happen, however, inevitably, is economic repercussions. I mean, if the Europeans decide that the US is no longer a reliable trade partner, which means a reliable economic partner, they are likely to decide, well, who else is there? Well, the answer is obviously developing countries, to the extent that they can continue to form good relations with them, and developing countries will be happier. But there's also China. The simple truth is, in a situation in which the US makes it quite clear that it's not a reliable trading partner, and it makes it clear that it's not bound by its commitments to NATO, which is becoming increasingly clear, then the Europeans have to say, well, we're on our own. The US we don't want to fight the US. We'll do everything we can to avoid it. But, well, we'll just have to get closer relations with China, because there's no real alternative. How do we deal with Russia if Americans are there? Well, China has leverage over Russia. Let's try and cozy up to China. And they will try that for sure. And the US will find, as powers that play unilateral, the game of unilateral bully, which is essentially what it will be doing, crazy though it seems to me, that they're isolated because nobody trusts it. And I wrote a column about this last week, and I think that's a pretty important point, because if they're pursuing America alone, not just America first, but America alone, then the US will, alas, increasingly be alone.
And I mean, Russia invaded Ukraine, the European Union, UK put on sanctions, as did we. We invade Greenland. I presume that we'll be facing sanctions
Of some kind.
From the European.
Greenland isn't a big thing. If you invade, if you invade Canada, I'm assuming you're not going to do something as crazy as that. But if you invade Canada, of course, all bets are off. Not that we're going to go to war for Canada, but Canada is an ally. It's a democracy. There's no doubt about that. If the US does anything like that, the US will definitively put itself in the camp of the arbitrary despotisms, and the rest of the world will respond accordingly.
Right. So, last question. You mentioned the word, weird, crazy. Do you think we have somebody who's just mentally imbalanced and has a whole group of? We certainly had, Hitler was mentally imbalanced. I don't want to, again, suggest that Trump equals Hitler. We don't know that, and we hope not. And he certainly didn't, engage in, build any concentration camps or exterminate anybody in his first term. But how crazy? When you think about Trump, do you think about somebody who's just completely nuts, a lunatic?
No, I tend to think of him as having two characteristics. maybe it's three. One, he really, really likes being boss. He likes to throw his weight around and for everybody to recognize that he is the boss. And that's a very, very powerful motivation. And you can perfectly reasonably say, well, in its more extreme forms, that's pretty crazy. I think that, to put it sort of crudely, this is a pretty common form of male personality. Whether you describe it as crazy is a matter of opinions. I will leave it to psychologists to decide whether it's crazy. It seems so common, but it's in my mind basically the personality of a gangster. And there are lots of gangsters in history, and there are lots of gangsters around. You know people like this. They're mostly men, nearly all, but that's what I think he's like. Then there's the question of how Trump thinks. Well, he thinks in terms of who's winner, and who's losers. He's very, very clear that he doesn't want to be a loser, and he's very clear that he wants to win. And that fits in the gangster personality. But how he defines winning and losing is, to put it bluntly, very, very primitive. So he doesn't have an intellectual armory which can define what it is to be a winner in the game of politics in a very subtle way. So let me compare him with the person who, in some ways, seems to me most like him of the post-war presidents. Most like, not like, and that's Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon had, I think, some of these characteristics, but he was a much cleverer man with a much more subtle understanding of strategic gaming, strategic playing than Trump. And he showed that, for example, with a really brilliant operation with Henry Kissinger of seducing China from the Soviet Union and making it, at least for a generation, an ally or quasi-ally. So the way Trump thinks of that, for example, which is the most obvious example we're going, that basically trade will be fair if the US has a zero bilateral imbalance with every country in the world. That's completely crazy. There's no doubt. Why? And the craziness comes from the fact that he simply has no understanding of economics at all. I mean, nothing. And is that crazy? Well, you could say it's just stupidity. It's not craziness. He just never put in the effort to understand what the people on the other side are thinking about. Similarly, he thinks about inflation and and how it works in a way that no economist could possibly recognize. This is just intellectual laziness, if you like. I don't think of it. I think it's extreme intellectual crazy laziness. So what he does is say, how do I define winning and losing? And he defines that in the simplest possible way. And then finally, because he's got this very intellectually lazy approach to understanding reality, and because he wants to be the boss, he wants people to tell him what a genius he is, how wonderful he is, and therefore he feels he knows he's constantly derided by journalists, intellectuals, and so forth. He knows that they wave data which show that he's wrong, and he wants all that suppressed because it demeans him, because it humiliates him. He wants everybody to recognize his genius. So I think that the best model for thinking about Trump is he is the emperor who isn't wearing any clothes. And because he's the emperor who isn't wearing clothes, but he really wants to be emperor, and he wants everybody to recognize an emperor, he would like to punish very, very badly, very, very seriously anybody who said, but like the little boy, but he's not wearing any clothes. And that's his problem is, well, he isn't wearing any clothes. And he gets very angry when people point this out to him. So he's sort of absurd. And that makes him really furious. This is how I see him. He's not a man who wants to go out and kill 100 million people, I think, but he's somebody who wants to be taken very, very, very seriously. When I think, because of my classical background, of a man who's most like him, but has certain parallels anyway, I think of him as being a bit like the Emperor Nero, who was a pretty sad despot, not completely mad, but wanted to be treated and viewed as one of the greatest artists in the history of the world. And he got very, very upset if people didn't recognize that he was one of the greatest artists in the history of the world. Well, I think Trump wants us to be seen as the greatest deal maker in the history of the world and the man who sorts out everything in the way he defines it. So his ascent to power is not somebody really like Hitler. I don't think he has a program like that. But the difference is he is ruling the US, which is the world's most important power, the world's most important liberal democracy, which saved and promoted the basic ideas of liberal democracy across the world. For that reason, what Trump is trying to do is immeasurably more serious even than Hitler tried to do, because of where he is and the position he holds, not because of his own personality.
Yeah. Martin, this has been delightful. I just want to remind everybody to take a look at Hans Christian Andersen's The Emperor's New Clothes. The last passage is about the emperor walking naked through the crowd. Everybody's cheering. The little boy says, "But wait, he's naked." And then there's a hush in the crowd for a minute or two, and then the emperor proceeds on his walk, and everybody starts cheering again. That's a very different world than we've known in the U.S. And we'll just keep in touch and keep talking about this. And I want to thank you for this very interesting, stimulating analysis of what I think is a deeply troubling situation. I know you agree. So thanks again.
Great pleasure, Larry, and best of luck.
Thank you.